This is the story of the heaviest tank Germany ever put into mass production, a machine of roughly 70 tons that could kill an enemy vehicle at 2,000 meters and then shatter its own drivetrain trying to drive away from the wreck. Germany finished somewhere between 487 and 492 of them, while the United States turned out 49,234 Sherman tanks, and the Soviet Union built more than 57,000 T-34s. Three numbers, and between them they contain the entire argument of this video. On the 13th of August, 1944, near a Polish village called Ogledow, a single Soviet T-34-85 hidden inside a haystack knocked out multiple Panzerkampfwagen Tiger OSB. Every specification sheet gave the Tiger OSB the thickest armor and the hardest hitting gun on any battlefield in the world, with 150 mm of frontal glassy plate sloped at 50 degrees, and an 8.8 cm weapon 71 calibers long. None of that mattered on that particular morning, because the Soviet gunner never aimed at the front. That gap between what the machine could do and what the machine actually did is the subject of this documentary. Nobody sensible disputes that the King Tiger was powerful. What this hour is about is why being that powerful turned into one of the most expensive mistakes Germany made in the entire war. The official designation ran as Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Ausführung B, and the ordnance inventory number was Sonderkraftfahrzeug 182. With the command versions carrying 1267 and 1268. German troops called the vehicle the Königstiger, which does not mean King Tiger in the way English speakers assume it does, because Königstiger is simply the German word for the Bengal tiger. Allied soldiers translated the word literally, produced King Tiger and sometimes Royal Tiger, and that mistranslation has now outlived the accurate version by about 80 years. Nothing about the origin of the Tiger OSB begins with a battle. Everything begins with a specification, and the date attached to that specification is unusually precise. On the 26th of May, 1941, a demand went out for an armor-piercing 8.8 cm shell capable of defeating 100 mm of plate at 1,500 meters. No tank appears anywhere in that requirement. A shell, a range, and a thickness of steel, and that was the seed. Then, on the 21st of June, 1941, exactly one day before German forces crossed into the Soviet Union, the weapons testing office known as WWII 6 asked Ferdinand Porsche to investigate mounting an 8.8 cm gun inside a rotating tank turret. Sit with that date for a moment, because it reframes everything that follows. Germany's heavy tank program, the one that eventually delivered the King Tiger, went into motion 24 hours before Operation Barbarossa opened, which places it before a single T-34 had been met in any volume, and before the Eastern Front existed as the place where German tank doctrine would be broken apart and rebuilt from scratch. The requirement that produced the heaviest German production tank of the war predates the campaign people usually cite to justify it. Modern engineering organizations have a name for what happened next, and they call it requirements creep. A specification gets written to solve a problem that has been correctly identified, and then the specification keeps growing while the problem it was written for quietly changes underneath. That 8.8 cm demand of May 1941 was a sound piece of engineering judgment. What happened to it over the following 2 years turned into a case study in what a specification does when it grows faster than the industrial base expected to build it. By October of 1941, Krupp and Porsche had begun working together to get the long 8.8 cm gun into a turret. Porsche knew the project internally as the TYP-101, the TYP-180, and the TYP-181, while the official designation read VK45.02P2, and production orders followed in February 1942. Then the Porsche design fell apart. Ferdinand Porsche had built his vehicle around an electric drive system, and neither the engine arrangement nor the suspension held together under testing. November 1942 brought outright cancellation of the Porsche VK45.02. Porsche's hulls did not go into the scrapyard, since that lineage fed into the Elephant and later the Jag Tiger, but the tank itself died on the drawing board, which left Henschel und Sohn of Kassel holding the entire program. Henschel's chief designer was a man named Erwin Aders, and Aders took responsibility for the hull. Krupp handled the turret, and Krupp handled both turrets in fact, and we will come back to that, because it produces one of the most stubbornly repeated errors anyone tells about this vehicle. Henschel's opening attempt carried the designation VK45.02H, and it amounted to a Tiger I with sloped armor grafted onto the concept, which the Panzer Commission rejected. An officer named Oberst Thomael turned down Henschel's interim proposal outright. What came back instead, in February 1943, was an instruction to redesign the vehicle, now VK45.03H, so that it shared as many components as possible with the MAN Panther II. That instruction matters far more than it sounds. The finished Tiger OSB shares almost no parts whatsoever with the Tiger I, which means the vehicle everyone calls the second Tiger is not a development of the first Tiger at all. In pure engineering terms, the King Tiger sits closer to a heavy Panther than it does to a Tiger. Naming ran into chaos alongside everything else. VK45.02H was called the Tiger II from the 18th of September, 1942, while VK45.03H initially carried the name Tiger III, and then on the 3rd of March, 1943, the VK45.03H was renamed the Tiger II. The vehicle changed identity twice on paper before a single production example physically existed. There is a modern equivalent to what Henschel was ordered to do in February 1943, and it turns up constantly in software and hardware development. It arrives the moment a company tells an engineering team that a new product must maintain compatibility with a platform that is itself still under development. The Panther II was not a finished, stable, mass-produced reference design, and the Panther II was a moving target. Henschel had been ordered to design a 70-ton tank around a component set nobody had frozen yet. Every hour spent chasing parts commonality with an unfinished platform amounted to an hour not spent on the one component that would eventually kill more Tiger IIs than any Allied gun managed, and that component was the final drive. Now for the first myth this documentary takes apart. It is a small one, but it teaches something useful about how durable a wrong label becomes once enough people repeat it. Nearly every book, video and video game refers to two Tiger II turrets, calling one the Porsche turret and the other the Henschel turret. Both of those names are wrong. Tank Encyclopedia, Wikipedia, and the Tank Museum at Bovington all land on the same point, which is that both turrets were designed and built by Krupp. Correctly named, the first turret is the Krupp VK45.02P2 term, meaning the early production turret. Krupp's early turret carried a curved, rounded front face 100 mm thick, steeply sloped sides, and a curved bulge on the left side to make room for the commander's cupola. 50 of these turrets came off Krupp's line originally. A contract for 100 had been placed on the 4th of February, 1942, and every one of those turrets was built for a Porsche hull that got cancelled underneath them. Once Porsche's vehicle died, the 50 completed turrets were converted from electric traverse to hydraulic traverse and bolted onto the first 50 Henschel hulls instead. Here comes the detail almost nobody tells. Roughly half of those Krupp turrets cracked during the heat forging of the curved front plates, and Krupp received orders not to scrap them. Weld the cracks shut, reheat the plates, and send them out. The first 50 King Tigers went to war carrying turrets that had been structurally repaired at the factory, because Germany could not afford to throw them away. Turret number 2 carries the name Krupp VK45.03 Syrian term, meaning the series production turret, and Henschel referred to it internally as the neue term Ausführung ab 48 Fahrzeug, meaning the new turret version from vehicle 48 onward. Flat front face angled back 10 degrees, thicker armor, no cupola bulge, and sides sloped at 20 degrees. Fitting began from vehicle number 51. The reason for the redesign sits in the geometry. That curved front on the early turret created a shot trap, since a round striking the curved lower face could deflect downward into the hull roof or into the turret ring. The most heavily armored turret face in the German inventory had a shape problem capable of funneling incoming fire straight into the weakest structural joint on the whole vehicle. WWII of the Tank Museum pushes the terminology further still. Wiley argues that the museum's own surviving early vehicle, most likely prototype V2, should properly be described as a pre-production Tiger II, that the first 50 curved turret tanks are early production vehicles, and that only the slab-fronted machines qualify as true production Tiger IIs. 50 turrets, half of them cracked in manufacture, welded shut and sent to war regardless. That is the first quiet signal in this story that the King Tiger never represented a triumph of German industrial confidence. What it represented was an industry already operating past the edge of its own material margin. January 1943 brought a judgment that the 100mm glacis plate was not thick enough. Orders came down to raise frontal armor to 150mm, and to lift the armor over the final drive flange from 80mm to 100. Adolf Hitler drove that decision personally. The bill for that decision came to roughly 1,760 kilograms of extra weight, which pushed the design to something near 68,000 kilograms, 14 tons heavier than the Tiger I, give or take. Precision matters on the finished armor scheme, because these numbers get mangled constantly. Front hull glacis on the production Tiger OSB measured 150 mm, sloped at 50 degrees. Lower front hull ran 100 mm at 50 degrees. Hull sides, 80 mm. Hull rear, 80. Turret sides and turret rear, 80 as well. Roof armor on both hull and turret came to 40 mm, and across the whole vehicle the armor range runs from 25 mm up to 185. Then comes the turret front, and this is where most sources fail. That early curved Krupp turret carried a 100 mm curved front, while the production Syrian term carried the figure everybody quotes, somewhere near 180 mm, flat, sloped about 10 degrees. Two completely different vehicles wearing an identical name. When a source tells you the King Tiger had 180 mm of turret front armor without saying which turret, that source is describing only 439 of the roughly 489 tanks ever built. Sloped armor itself did not originate in Kassel. German designers adopted sloped armor under direct influence from the Soviet T-34, and the idea reached the Tiger OSB by way of the Panther. What Henschel did was take the Panther's sloping scheme and push it up to 150 mm. Automotive and aerospace engineers have a phrase for what happens next, and they call it the weight spiral. Add armor, and the suspension needs strengthening. Strengthen the suspension, and the vehicle gains weight. A heavier vehicle demands a stronger final drive and burns more fuel, which means more fuel capacity, which is more weight again. Every kilogram added to protect the crew ends up demanding additional kilograms elsewhere that protect nobody at all. Those 1,760 kilograms added to the glacis in January 1943 did not stay at 1,760 kilograms. That mass propagated through the entire vehicle, and it landed hardest on the single component least able to absorb it. Every criticism in this documentary needs a counterweight, and the counterweight is the gun. The 8.8 cm KWK-43L71 was genuinely outstanding, and no serious historian argues otherwise. Krupp designed the KWK-43 with a barrel 71 calibers long and a bore length of 6,248 mm, which runs more than 1.3 meters longer than the Tiger I's KWK-36L56. Complete, the gun massed around 2,265 kilograms, and the barrel came in two pieces. Muzzle velocity reached as high as 1,130 meters per second with armor-piercing composite rigid ammunition. Rate of fire ran 6 to 10 rounds per minute, and maximum firing range stretched to roughly 9,350 meters. Penetration figures come from Thomas Jensen Hillary Doyle, measured against armor sloped at 30 degrees. The Panzergranate 3943 armor-piercing capped ballistic capped round punched through 202 mm at 100 meters, and 132 mm at 2,000 meters. Its composite rigid partner, the Panzergranate 4043, managed 238 mm at 100 meters and 153 mm at 2,000. Tank Encyclopedia supplies a separate set measured against vertical plate at 90 degrees, giving 185 mm at 500 meters, 165 at 1,000, 147 at 1,500, and 132 at 2,000 meters for the standard armor-piercing round. Then comes accuracy, and the accuracy data contains one of the most revealing gaps in the whole subject. Under practice conditions, using the TZF-9B1 or the TZF-9D sight, a Tiger OSB gunner put a first round onto a target measuring 2 meters by 2.5 meters almost 100% of the time at 1,000 meters. At 1,500 meters, 95 to 97%. Out at 2,000 meters, 85 to 87%. Recorded combat performance came in far worse. Above 80% at 1,000 meters. Somewhere in the 60s at 1,500. And down in the 40s at 2,000 meters. Read those two sets against each other. On the range, at 2,000 meters, the KWK-43 hit 85 to 87% of the time, while in combat, at that identical range, it hit in the 40s. Nothing changed about the gun, and nothing changed about the optics. What changed was that somebody was shooting back, the target had started moving, the range had to be judged by eye, and the tank had usually just driven somewhere difficult to reach the firing position. That gap between test bed performance and field performance carries the whole weight of this documentary, and it applies to every single aspect of the King Tiger. On paper, this vehicle stood as the most formidable tank of the Second World War. Paper and field turned out to be two very different places. Ammunition stowage on the early turret ran 78 to 80 rounds, and the production turret held up to 84 or 86. After August 1944, once crews started losing vehicles to turret ammunition fires, many of them deliberately carried fewer rounds, somewhere near 68, and stopped using turret stowage altogether. A crew-level workaround, invented in the field, that stripped roughly 20% off the vehicle's design capability in exchange for not burning to death inside it. Power came from the Maybach HL230P30, a V12 petrol engine of 23 liters. Early Tiger OSB vehicles ran that engine governed to around 600 horsepower at 2,500 revolutions per minute, and from roughly vehicle 251 onward the HL230P45 delivered up to 700 horsepower at 3,000 revolutions. 700 metric horsepower is the nominal figure quoted everywhere, which converts to 690 imperial horsepower, or 515 kilowatts. Transmission duties fell to the Maybach Ulver unit with 8 forward gears and 4 reverse, while steering ran through a Henschel L801 double radius unit with a minimum turning radius of 2.08 meters. Now the number that settles everything. Power-to-weight ratio came out at approximately 10 metric horsepower per ton, and the Tiger I managed approximately 13. Read that twice. The King Tiger, the later vehicle, the more advanced vehicle, the far more expensive vehicle, carried a worse power-to-weight ratio than the tank it was built to succeed. Germany spent 2 years and enormous industrial capital producing a heavy tank less mobile per ton than its own predecessor. Which brings us to the final drive. Those final drives shared design lineage with the Tiger I and the Panther, and they were being asked to push the output of a 700 horsepower engine into a vehicle weighing close to 70 tons. Sudden load broke them. High-speed load broke them. Tank Encyclopedia describes the drivetrain, flatly, as the Achilles heel of the entire design. A unit report shows exactly what that meant. In September 1944, after operations in the Arnhem sector, Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 reported on the state of its battalion, which fielded 45 Tiger IIs. After traveling somewhere between 50 and 100 kilometers, that battalion had recorded 12 final drive housing failures, 6 transmission faults, and 1 drive shaft twisted so badly that engineers had to cut it out of the vehicle. 12 final drive failures inside a single battalion, over a distance a modern car covers on a motorway in under an hour. Reliability engineers have a name for a component that behaves like the Tiger II final drive, and they call it a single point of failure. It is the component whose failure takes down the whole system no matter how well everything else performs. Build the finest gun in the world, wrap it in the thickest armor in the world, mount all of it on a hull with immaculate weld seams, and when one gearbox housing cracks, the entire assembly becomes a 70-ton static pillbox that 5 men have to walk away from. Modern data center design obsesses over this exact problem, which is why designers build redundant power, redundant cooling and redundant network paths. System reliability is never the average of component reliabilities. System reliability is governed by the weakest link in the chain. Henschel built a tank with world-class armor, a world-class gun, and a final drive that could not survive a road march, and in reliability terms that means Henschel built a tank that could not survive a road march. Running gear used 9 overlapping road wheels per side, and the word overlapping matters, because the Tiger I had used a triple interleaved arrangement and the Tiger OSB did not. Those wheels measured 800 mm in diameter, steel-tired and resilient, manufactured by Deutsche Eisenwerke. Steel tires saved rubber, which Germany did not have, and raised bearing strength, which the vehicle badly needed. Suspension came from transverse torsion bars. 2 entirely different sets of tracks were required. The narrow 660 mm transport track, the Verladeket, was shared with the Panther II and went on for rail movement, while the 800 mm combat track, the Geländeket, went on for operations. Every rail deployment of a Tiger battalion meant crews changing every track on every tank twice, once to load and once to unload. A new one-piece cast track from Mayag of Braunschweig entered service in July 1944, and the final pattern arrived in March 1945, weeks before production stopped for good. Combat weight ran from about 68.5 tons with the early turret to about 69.8 with the production turret. Hull length measured 7.38 meters, stretching to 10.286 meters with the gun forward, on a width of 3.755 meters and a height of 3.09. 5 men crewed it. Speed is another place where paper and field split violently apart. The manual claimed 41.5 kilometers per hour, sustained speed came in around 38, and realistic top speed in 8th gear reached about 34.6. When Soviet engineers at Kubinka put a captured Tiger OSB through its paces, the measured figures came out at 30 kilometers per hour on road, 15 on dirt, and 7 km per hour on soft ground. Cross-country speed generally settled between 15 and 20. 7 km per hour on soft ground is walking pace. A 70-ton target moving at walking pace. Fuel capacity stood at 860 liters. Operational range on road reached roughly 170 to 190 kilometers. Cross-country range fell to around 120, and in Soviet testing the vehicle managed only about 90 kilometers, in a country that by 1944 was strangling for fuel. Then the bridges, which the Tiger Osp was simply too heavy for across most of Europe. Movement required either the standard 16-ton engineer bridge or fording, and the fording requirement got relaxed in mid-1944 to a depth of 1.8 meters. Entire formations needed Tiger routes surveyed and established in advance with reinforced crossings, because these tanks could not use the road network that already existed. One documented example says it all. During Operation Conrad III in Hungary, a combat engineer bridge over the Sarvais Canal collapsed under the load, and the Königsteiger had to ford the canal on a crossing reinforced with railroad ties. Anyone who has watched a wind turbine blade travel down a motorway has seen the modern descendant of this problem. Oversized load transport demands route surveys, bridge load calculations, permits, escort vehicles, and sometimes temporary reinforcement of infrastructure. The object itself might be superbly engineered, and moving that object from where it was built to where it needs to be remains a completely separate engineering problem, frequently the harder of the two. German forces had to solve the oversized load problem under fire, on a collapsing rail network, against an enemy that owned the sky. The King Tiger was never merely a tank that struggled tactically. What arrived at the front was a logistics burden with a gun attached to it. When a Tiger Osp broke down, and it broke down constantly, somebody had to move the thing. Recovering one Tiger II took multiple Sonderkraftfahrzeug 9 FAMA half-tracks, and the FAMA was an 18-ton recovery vehicle, so one of them never sufficed. More damaging still, towing one Tiger with another Tiger was prohibited outright, because of the risk of drivetrain damage to the towing vehicle. The obvious solution, using the enormously powerful tank parked right beside the broken one, had been banned by the very weakness that broke the first tank. That produced a compounding problem. Heavy tank battalions were repeatedly split up and parceled out to different formations, which happened constantly and became a chronic issue throughout Normandy, and splitting the battalion split the centralized recovery capability along with it. A company detached to support an infantry division did not take the battalion's recovery assets alone. Tanks broke down, and nothing existed nearby to move them. So the crews destroyed their own tanks, routinely. Standard practice meant draining the gun's recuperator and then firing the gun, which wrecked the barrel, or simply blowing the vehicle up. Tank Encyclopedia summarizes the operational history of the Tiger Osp in one sentence, and it is a brutal one. More Tiger IIs were destroyed by their own crews than by the Allies. Picture what that sentence describes at human scale. 5 men. A machine that consumed hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks and an enormous quantity of scarce alloy steel to produce. A gun capable of killing anything on the battlefield at 2,000 meters. And the crew standing in a field, draining hydraulic fluid out of a recuperator so they can fire one last round and ruin their own barrel, because the tank will not move, nothing exists that can move it, and the enemy is coming up the road. That happened again, and again, and again. Every Tiger Osp came out of Kassel. Henschel und Sohn, a company founded in 1810, built the hulls and carried out final assembly at Werk 3, the Mittelfeld plant, in Halle 3. Krupp-Abessen designed and built the turrets and also supplied raw hulls in cooperation with the Dortmund Horter Huttenbeering. Wegmann and Company, also of Kassel, assembled the turrets. Maybach supplied engines and transmissions, Deutsche Eisenwerke made the road wheels, Mayag of Braunschweig made tracks, Daimler-Benz supplied the machine gun ball mount, and Leitz made the gun sight. Now the workforce, and this is where the story gets considerably darker. Henschel employed approximately 13,300 people when war broke out in September 1939, and by the time of the first heavy raids in October 1943 employment had climbed to roughly 24,000. Those October raids cost the company approximately 3,500 employees. Both figures come from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, which also records that Henschel produced 1,828 tanks across the entire war, with tank production representing 34% of the plant's wartime activity. Here is the part of the King Tiger story that gets skipped in almost every documentary and every video game description ever written. Henschel und Sohn used forced labor extensively. By 1945, the company was running approximately 8,000 workers across two 12-hour shifts, and Henschel held approximately 6,000 forced laborers inside its factories. Kassel as a whole contained more than 30,000 forced laborers, distributed across more than 200 camps and sites. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum describes the framework all of that operated within. Following the German defeat at Stalingrad, through 1942 and 1943, concentration camp prisoners were increasingly used as forced laborers inside German armaments industries, and across 1943 and 1944 hundreds of subcamps were established in or near industrial plants, administered by main camps including Buchenwald and Gross-Rosen. Krupp, which built the turrets and supplied hulls, and Maybach, which built the engines, were both deeply implicated in the Nazi forced and slave labor system. Krupp's use of concentration camp and prisoner of war labor is documented, and Krupp faced prosecution for it at Nuremberg in the Krupp trial of 1947 and 1948. A note on precision now, because precision is the standard this channel holds to. Available sources do not permit a specific death toll attributable to Tiger II assembly in isolation, since coerced labor at Henschel was pooled across locomotive production, truck production, and tank production together. Attaching a mortality figure to this particular vehicle would not be honest, and this documentary is not going to invent one. What is honest, and what is documented, comes to this. Every single Panzerkampfwagen Tiger OSB ever completed was assembled inside a plant whose workforce included thousands of forced laborers. The engineering achievement and the coercion cannot be pulled apart from one another. They occurred in the same buildings, at the same time, on the same production line. Then the bombs came for Kassel, and they came in a tight, concentrated sequence. 5 raids struck the Henschel plant on the 22nd, 27th, and 28th of September 1944, and again on the 2nd and 7th of October. Those 5 raids destroyed 95% of the plant's floor area, and the estimated production loss runs to approximately 657 Tiger IIs. Set that against the total. Germany completed somewhere between 487 and 492 Tiger OSB tanks across the whole war, which means Allied bombing in a 2-week window cost Germany more King Tigers than Germany ever managed to finish. A primary document survives on this, and the language is bureaucratic and bleak. On the 31st of December, 1944, Dr. Blaketer, chairman of the Hauptausschuss Panzerkampfwagen inside Speer's ministry, wrote the following. Tiger production at Henschel, Kassel. Extreme difficulties have been caused by the somewhat complicated power supply and by the labor situation through repeated air attacks on Kassel. Production seriously obstructed by 3 severe attacks in September 1944 and 3 further attacks causing a long-term stoppage of power. That is the German Armaments Ministry, in its own words, at the close of 1944, describing the King Tiger program as broken. Production totals for the Tiger OSB are disputed, and the reasons behind the dispute matter as much as the figures themselves. Strongest archival basis belongs to 489, which comes from the serial number analysis by Thomas Jentz and Hilary Doyle. 459 vehicles manufactured by the end of February 1945, with the last serial number around 280459, plus 30 accepted by the inspectorate in March 1945. Total produced, 489, with deliveries running lower. Horst Steibert gives 487, which is 489 minus the 2 prototypes. The popular figure, the one appearing on Wikipedia and in most general accounts, is 492, broken down as one vehicle in 1943, 379 in 1944, and 112 in 1945. Older sources from Haug and Weeks give 485, and a low-end figure of 424 gets cited occasionally. Why do these conflict? Because the sources are counting different things. Produced is not the same as accepted is not the same as delivered, and delivered is not the same as issued to a combat unit, while some counts fold in the 2 or 3 prototypes and others leave them out. The Jensen-Doyle figure of 489, or 487 excluding prototypes, is the most rigorously sourced number available, and this documentary uses it. Germany's intentions were far larger. Orders escalated from 176 to 1,234, and get cited as reaching 1,500, slightly more than the 1,347 Tiger I tanks actually built. Projected output was supposed to hit 125 vehicles per month by the summer of 1945. Actual output tells a completely different story. Prototype V1 came together in October or November 1943, with V2 and V3 following that December, and series production opened in January 1944. By May 1944, only about 20 vehicles existed. Against a plan of 191 vehicles for the period from October 1943 to May 1944, just 38 were ready. On the 1st of June, 1944, 5 days before the Normandy landings, precisely 5 Tiger Osprey tanks had been delivered. 5. After the castle raids, projections of 40 and 35 vehicles for January and February 1945 collapsed toward nothing at all. Now the cost. A Tiger Osprey cost 321,500 Reichsmarks, which in 1944 and 1945 terms works out at approximately 160,755 United States dollars. Comparisons follow, and these figures exclude weapons and radios. A Panzer III cost approximately 96,163 Reichsmarks. A Panzer IV, roughly 103,462. A Panther, about 117,100. A Stug III, around 82,500. A Tiger I averaged somewhere near 250,000 to 250,700 Reichsmarks, with early Tiger I examples running as high as 800,000. One King Tiger cost roughly 3 times a Panzer IV, and considerably more than 2.5 Panthers. Against that, the United States Army Service Forces Catalog Ordinance 531, dated the 9th of August 1945, puts the M4 Sherman's unit cost between $44,556 and $64,455 depending on variant. The King Tiger cost roughly 2.5 to 4 times as much as a Sherman. Then comes the production comparison that ends the argument. Tiger Osprey, approximately 489 built. Tiger I, 1,347. Panther, more than 6,000. IS-2, more than 3,800. T-34, approximately 57,000. M4 Sherman, 49,234 built excluding the prototype, with Encyclopedia Britannica giving 49,324 produced across 11 plants between 1942 and 1946. Set those two numbers beside each other one final time, because the thesis of this documentary compresses into a single ratio. For every King Tiger Germany completed, the United States completed roughly 100 Shermans. Not 100 tanks across the whole Allied coalition. 100 Shermans, from one country, of one type. The King Tiger never lost to a better tank. The King Tiger lost to arithmetic. Combat began for the Tiger Osprey on the 11th of July, 1944, with Schwerpanzerabteilung 503, on the Western Front in Normandy, the battalion having re-equipped with early curved turret Tiger IIs that June. Introduction to combat lasted exactly 1 week before the battalion met something no amount of frontal armor could answer. On the 18th of July, 1944, Operation Goodwood opened behind a preparatory Allied bombing effort of extraordinary weight, and the 3rd Company of Schwerpanzerabteilung 503 was caught underneath it at Cagny. That company was devastated, and one detail captures the scale of what happened, which is that the bomb impacts flipped a 56-ton Tiger onto its back. Not knocked out. Not penetrated. Turned over. By blast alone. No armor scheme answers that, and no gun answers it either. What answers it is air superiority, and by July 1944 Germany did not have air superiority and was never going to get it back. By the 1st of August, 1944, Schwerpanzerabteilung 503 had been attached to the 21st Panzer Division with only 13 operational tanks. Standard establishment for a Tiger battalion ran to 45 vehicles, 3 companies of 14 tanks each plus 3 command tanks, which puts the battalion at under a third of establishment within 3 weeks of first contact. Units that operated the Tiger Osprey in the German army were Schwerpanzerabteilung 501, 503, later redesignated Feldherrnhall, along with 505, 506, 509, 510, and 511, which had previously been 502. In the Waffen-SS, Schwer-SS Panzerabteilung 501, formerly 101, 502, formerly 102, and 503. That completes the list. 10 battalions, and that constitutes the entire operational footprint of the most famous heavy tank of the Second World War. This is the moment to correct 2 of the most persistent misattributions in popular history of the war, and both involve names permanently welded to the King Tiger in the public imagination. Michael Wittmann did not command a Tiger II at Villers-Bocage on the 13th of June, 1944. Whitman commanded a Tiger I with the 2nd Company of Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 101, and Whitman died on the 8th of August, 1944, near St. Aignan de Kremsnil, also in a Tiger I. Otto Carius, who wrote Tigers in the Mud, likewise made his reputation somewhere other than a Tiger II. Carius was a Tiger I ace, and from early 1945 commanded a Jagdtiger with Schwer Panzerjägerabteilung 512. Carius survived the war and became a pharmacist, naming his business the Tiger Apotheke. Of the 3 most famous German tank commanders, only one is firmly a King Tiger man, and that is Kurt Nispel, whose story does not end the way the legend suggests either. Early August 1944 brought the Tiger Osby to the Eastern Front for the first time, with Schwer Panzerabteilung 501 deploying into Poland and into the fighting around the Sandomierz bridgehead. What happened next matters more than any other engagement in the vehicle's history, and most of the damage occurred before anybody fired a shot. Schwer Panzerabteilung 501 unloaded 45 Tiger IIs at Kielce, with a destination in the vicinity of Obeldau, approximately 45 kilometers away. 8 tanks arrived. 37 Tiger Osby tanks broke down across a 45-kilometer road march, principally through reduction gear and final drive failures. A loss rate above 80%, inflicted entirely by the vehicle's own drivetrain, before a single Soviet gun had fired. Then, between the 11th and 13th of August 1944, came the ambush. Lieutenant Alexander Oskin commanded a T-3485 of the 53rd Guards Tank Brigade, part of the 6th Guards Tank Corps, with the position prepared and coordinated by Colonel Arkhipov and Guards Captain Ivashkin. Oskin's crew consisted of the driver Stetsenko, the gunner Mirk Hadarov, the radio operator Grushin, and the loader Kalichev. Concealed in haystacks, in morning fog, Oskin's T-3485 engaged the advancing Tiger IIs at approximately 400 meters. Oskin's gunner never aimed at the 150mm Glassy. Oskin's gunner aimed at 80mm of side armor. Multiple King Tigers were destroyed or knocked out, and the command tank, Red 502, was captured very largely intact and shipped to the Soviet research establishment at Kubinka. Oskin became a hero of the Soviet Union. Separately, the 71st Independent Guards Heavy Tank Regiment, equipped with IS-2 tanks, claimed 4 King Tigers burned and 2 more knocked out in the same fighting, alongside a number of regular Tigers. The Soviet account of the engagement, from the Arkhipov and Korobov narrative, describes it this way. A monstrous tank emerged from the valley. It moved in bursts, losing traction in the sand. I saw how black holes appeared in the sides of enemy tanks, one after another. One tank started burning. That is memoir recollection rather than a contemporaneous document, and this documentary flags it that way. The physical outcome is not in any dispute, because the captured tank still sits in Russia and can be walked around today. Here is what Obeldau actually demonstrates, and it is not what the popular telling suggests. The popular telling has a brave Soviet crew getting lucky against a superior machine. Records show something else entirely. Records show that 82% of the King Tiger force had already destroyed itself on a road march of 45 kilometers. Records show the survivors then being engaged from the flank at 400 meters, in fog, across sand where the vehicles were losing traction, by a tank type that Soviet testing at Kubinka would later confirm could not penetrate the Tiger II's front hull at 300 meters. The T-3485 never defeated the King Tiger's armor. The T-3485 declined to attack the King Tiger's armor. And the King Tiger's own drivetrain had already removed 37 of the 45 vehicles supposed to be there. None of that is luck. What it describes is a system failure being exploited by a competent opponent. September 1944 found Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 operating in the Arnhem sector during the Market Garden period, and the battalion's report belongs here in sequence, because it establishes that Obeldau was no anomaly. 45 Tiger Osby tanks on strength. After 50 to 100 kilometers of travel, 12 final drive housing failures, 6 transmission faults, and 1 drive shaft twisted so badly it had to be cut out. 2 battalions, 2 fronts, 1 month apart, and in identical failure mode. September 1944 also brought the end of Tsimurit, the anti-magnetic mine paste applied at the factory, discontinued over fears that Tsimurit was flammable. Those fears had already been officially disproved. Germany stripped a protective measure off its most expensive tank on the basis of a concern its own testing had invalidated. The commander's cupola had also switched from welded to bolted construction back in August. One small detail is worth preserving. Only about 2 of the early curved turret Tiger IIs, numbers 314, named Anneliese, and 334, are believed to have received winter whitewash, and that happened in Hungary. On the 16th of December, 1944, the Ardennes offensive opened, and the spearhead of the northern effort was Kampfgruppe, commanded by SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Paper, with Schwer-SS Panzerabteilung 501 attached. Kampfgruppe suffered close to 100% losses. Roughly 6 or 7 Tiger Osby tanks were abandoned around Luglis and Stumont, and Heeresgruppe recorded losing 13 King Tigers between the 16th and 31st of December 1944. How they were lost is the part that matters. Most were abandoned through fuel exhaustion or immobilization rather than destroyed in combat. Abandoned. On the night of the 23rd to 24th of December, 1944, Paper's force broke out of Luglis on foot. On foot. The most heavily armored tanks in the world were left standing in a Belgian village because no petrol existed to put in them, and the crews walked away. What killed Kampfgruppe was never a weapons problem, and the modern analogy is an infrastructure one that anybody who has planned a long journey in an electric vehicle understands immediately. Range and refueling infrastructure are not secondary specifications. Range and refueling infrastructure determine whether the vehicle can perform its function at all. A machine with extraordinary capability and inadequate energy logistics works beautifully within a small radius of its supply and turns into scrap outside it. The Tiger Osby carried 860 liters and managed roughly 120 kilometers cross-country. Ardennes planning demanded deep, fast penetration through difficult terrain in winter, into an enemy rear area, along roads that frequently could not take the vehicle's weight. Kampfgruppe had been handed a tank whose fundamental parameters were incompatible with the mission it was ordered to carry out. One of the vehicles abandoned in that fighting still exists, surviving through one of the strangest transactions in tank preservation history. Tiger No. 213, hull No. 280273, built in October 1944, served with Schwer-SS Panzerabteilung 501 as the command tank of SS Obersturmführer Döllinger. After the war, Madame Jenny Guénin-Duez acquired the tank, according to the well-established account, for a bottle of cognac. That transaction is why a King Tiger sits in Luglis today. On the 18th of January, 1945, Operation Conrad III opened in Hungary with Schwer Panzerabteilung 509 committed, and within 2 weeks that battalion had lost 40 of its 45 Tiger Osby tanks. Of those 40, only 10 counted as total or irrecoverable losses. The remaining 30 were recoverable, and were lost anyway, because no capacity existed to recover them. By the 30th of January, 1945, Schwer Panzerabteilung 509 had 5 operational tanks, 30 vehicles that could have been repaired, abandoned because Germany could not physically retrieve them. Each one representing 321,500 Reichsmarks out of an economy with nothing left to spend. Conrad III was also the operation in which the engineer bridge over the Sarvais Canal collapsed and the King Tigers forded on railroad ties. Between the 17th and 24th of February 1945, Operation Sudwind was mounted, generally regarded as the last successful German offensive of the war. Then, on the 6th of March 1945, Operation Spring Awakening opened around Lake Balaton, and the mud immobilized the King Tigers. The description that came out of that operation held that the crews were steering U-boats, not tanks. That phrase deserves a moment of attention. German crews said that about the most advanced armored vehicle their country ever mass-produced, 4 years after the specification was written, during the last major offensive of the war. Not a tank. A submarine, wallowing through mud at 7 kilometers per hour. At the end of March 1945, Kassel fell, production stopped, and the last 13 Tiger Osby tanks were collected at the factory on the 31st. Between the 16th and 19th of April 1945, the Seelow Heights were fought over, with Schwer-SS Panzerabteilung 503 attached to the Nordland Formation. Commanders in that final phase included Karl Braumann, who received the Knight's Cross on the 29th of April, 1945, along with George Diers, Karl Korner, and Fritz Herzig. From late April to the 2nd of May, 1945, the last Tiger Osby tanks fought inside Berlin, where the final 6 Tiger IIs of Schwer-SS Panzerabteilung 503 were lost, with a breakout attempted on the night of the 1st to 2nd of May. Kurt Nispel, the highest-scoring tank ace of the Second World War, credited with 168 confirmed and up to 195 claimed, who commanded a Tiger Osby with Schwer Panzerabteilung 503 in later Feldherrnhall, was killed on the 28th of April, 1945, at Wostitz, fighting Soviet tanks. Nispel's Tiger II blew apart when its ammunition exploded. Nispel had been recommended for the Knight's Cross 4 separate times, and was denied on every occasion, being noted for anti-authority and anti-Nazi attitudes. On the 8th and 9th of May, 1945, the surviving units surrendered, with Schwerpanzerabteilung 509 giving up near Linz. One final statistic frames the whole German armored effort at the end. On the 15th of March, 1945, across the entire Eastern Front, Germany had 208 Tiger I and Tiger II tanks present, of which approximately 53% were operational. The same returns list 762 Panthers and 1,239 Panzer IVs. Tigers, the tanks dominating every documentary, every game and every popular history of German armor, made up a tiny fraction of the actual German tank force, and roughly half of that fraction could not move. Both the Soviets and the Western Allies got hold of Tiger OSB tanks and tested them, and the results rank among the most valuable evidence available, because the people producing them had no incentive to flatter the vehicle and every incentive to understand it accurately. Soviet trials at Kubinka in 1944 concluded the following. Impacts of 3 to 4 armor-piercing or high-explosive fragmentation shells from 152, 122, or 100 mm artillery pieces caused cracks, spalling and destruction of the weld seams in the tank's 100 to 190 mm thick frontal armor plates at ranges of 500 to 1,000 meters. The same trials confirmed the vehicle's strengths as well, finding that the 85 mm gun of the T-34-85 failed to penetrate the Tiger II's front hull plates or cause structural damage at 300 meters. Both findings are true simultaneously, and both matter. Frontal armor was effectively immune to the standard Soviet medium tank gun. Frontal armor could also be structurally wrecked by heavy artillery caliber weapons without being penetrated at all. That second finding points straight at the metallurgy, which is a story in itself. Late-war German armor plate showed an absence of molybdenum, since the supply had been lost and vanadium was substituted in its place, and the substitution cut malleability and produced brittleness. Soviet testing at Kubinka and American testing at Isigny both found spalling and cracking at the weld seams even where rounds did not fully penetrate, and spalling inside the hull could wreck the transmission. Tank Archives adds nuance here that this documentary is not going to flatten. Nickel was retained in the thick plates. Vanadium use had nearly stopped by the autumn of 1944. Chrome was the one alloying element used consistently across the whole war. So the popular version, in which Germany simply removed molybdenum and the armor turned brittle, runs too simple. What actually happened is that German armor metallurgy through 1944 and 1945 was being continuously reformulated around whatever material happened to be available, and the quality control consequences showed up under test as cracked welds and internal spalling. Kubinka measured the gun as well, and the measurement reads as a compliment. The 8.8 cm KWK-43 rated approximately 165 mm of penetration at 30 degrees at 1,000 meters, comparable to the Soviet 122 mm D-25 carried by the IS-2. That same gun could pass completely through another Tiger II's turret at 400 meters. American supplied 76 mm guns penetrated Tiger II side armor at 1.5 to 2 times the range at which the Soviet 85 mm managed it. A Western assessment exists too, and it is remarkably blunt for an intelligence document. The United States War Department's Handbook on German Military Forces, dated March 1945, states that the King Tiger is a tank designed for defensive warfare or for breaking through strong lines of defense, that it is unsuitable for rapid maneuver and highly mobile warfare because of its great weight and low speed, and that when buttoned up the tank is extremely blind, which the handbook names as one of its weakest points. An enemy intelligence document, written while the war was still being fought, arrived at precisely the conclusion this documentary has been building toward. The Americans had the King Tiger correctly assessed before the shooting stopped. Now we reach the argument this channel exists to make, and it is the part of the King Tiger story that will be least familiar. Almost every popular account of the Tiger OSB rests on kill ratios. The Tigers, we are told, achieved extraordinary exchange rates, and individual commanders accumulated scores in the hundreds. Christopher Wilbeck's 2004 study, Sledgehammers, Strengths and Flaws of Tiger Tank Battalions in World War II, documents high kill ratios where Tiger battalions were committed and operational. Stephen Zaloga reviewed Wilbeck's book in the Journal of Military History, Volume 68, Number 4, in 2004. Zaloga's central objection runs one sentence long, and it dismantles the foundation of most Tiger literature. The author seems unaware that the Wehrmacht's own intelligence service on the Eastern Front, Fremdheerost, regularly discounted German army tank kill claims by 30 to 50%. That is not a post-war revisionist judgment. That is German military intelligence, during the war, refusing to believe its own units. The primary document survives. Fremdheerost document number 113044, held in the United States National Archives as T78 Roll 619, records that Soviet losses as claimed were reduced by 20% and 15% respectively from the 1st of December 1942 to the 30th of June 1943, and by a total of 50% from the 1st of July 1943 onward. The German Army's own intelligence branch cut its own unit's tank kill claims in half. Panzerworld's analysis of German tank kill claims lands in the same place, finding the claims greatly exaggerated, and finding that most Allied tank losses were not caused by German tanks at all. Testimony exists from inside the units themselves. Alfred Rubbel, a veteran of Schwerpanzerabteilung 503, the 1st Battalion to take the Tiger Osp into combat, stated that the battalion did not, as a practice, count destroyed tanks or ascribe them to an individual. Read that against the ace tallies. Kurt Nispel, 168 confirmed and up to 195 claimed. Michael Whitman, approximately 138. Otto Carius, approximately 150. Those figures get recited constantly, and a veteran of the relevant battalion says the counting practice that would have generated them did not exist. What this describes is a data integrity problem, and it has an exact modern analog in corporate governance. Every serious financial system in the world runs on one principle, which is that self-reported performance figures require independent audit, because an organization reporting its own results holds both the opportunity and the incentive to report favorably. Fraud is not even required for this. Optimism does it. Double counting does it. Counting a damaged asset as destroyed does it. Two units both counting the same event does it. German tank kill claims were self-reported operational metrics with no independent verification, generated by units under pressure to demonstrate results, and they have been transmitted into popular history as though somebody had audited them. Fremdheerost applied the audit. Fremdheerost cut the claims by 30 to 50%. Popular history has largely ignored the audit and kept the raw figures. A further layer sits underneath this one, and it is historiographical rather than statistical. Wolfram Wett's book The Wehrmacht, History, Myth, Reality, and David Harrisville's The Virtuous Wehrmacht, published in 2021, document how post-war German officers, assisted by Cold War political convenience, constructed what historians call the myth of the clean Wehrmacht. That same post-war ecosystem of officer memoirs and veteran-authored unit histories is also the primary source ecosystem for the Panzer Ace narrative and the kill ratio narrative. Roman Toppel has specifically criticized the uncritical use of German-authored unit histories in the adventure school of popular military writing, and Toppel's 2018 essay on the writer Franz Kurowski is cited in academic work as grounds for heavily discounting the credibility of popular kill claims. Let us be exact about what this documentary is arguing. Nobody here is claiming German tanks were ineffective, because German tanks were effective. The argument is that the specific numerical claims sustaining the King Tiger's reputation come out of a source ecosystem professional historians have identified as systematically unreliable, and that the German Army's own wartime intelligence service refused to take those claims at face value. When the German Army would not believe the numbers in 1944, a documentary made in 2026 has no business repeating them as fact. Adam Tooze's 2006 study, The Wages of Destruction, reframed the entire discussion of German war production, and its argument runs directly into the King Tiger. Tooze's core point is structural. Germany's economy was simply too small for the war Germany chose to fight, and Tooze puts Germany at roughly 13% of world manufacturing capacity against an Allied coalition holding overwhelming superiority. Tooze makes a second observation that damages the King Tiger even more specifically, which is that Germany never achieved mass production of anything, because German industry constantly tinkered with designs at the direct expense of standardization and spare parts availability. Hold the Tiger Osp against that framework. Design identity changed twice on paper. The glassy specification was revised upward mid-program. The turret changed at vehicle 51. The engine specification changed at roughly vehicle 251. Simerid was applied and then discontinued. The cupola changed from welded to bolted. The track pattern changed in July 1944 and again in March 1945. Factory camouflage was introduced in September 1944 and then abandoned. A production run of fewer than 500 vehicles containing at least 7 major configuration changes is not mass production. What that describes is continuous prototyping conducted at industrial scale, during a war, under bombing. Tooze himself has cautioned against reading his work as declaring Nazi economic policy rational, saying his intention was to problematize that word, and this documentary respects the caution. Nobody here is arguing that German leadership performed calculated economic sums and got them wrong. The argument is that the constraints were real, the constraints were knowable, and the Tiger Rossby program proceeded against them regardless. Anthony Tucker Jones, in Tiger I and Tiger II, puts the conclusion plainly. The Tigers were over-engineered, required raw materials that were in short supply, were time-consuming to manufacture and difficult to recover from the battlefield. Only around 1,300 of the Tiger I and fewer than 500 of the Tiger II were produced, so they were never going to make anything more than a local impact on the outcome of the fighting on the Western and Eastern fronts. Local impact. That is the ceiling. Not strategic impact. Local. The counter case deserves a proper hearing, and one exists. Thomas Jentz, whose archival work on this vehicle outstrips anyone else's, argues that despite its size the Tiger Rossby possessed surprisingly good tactical mobility. Wilbeck's data does show high kill ratios wherever the battalions were committed in functioning. And there is a defensible argument that as a defensive breakthrough blunting weapon, which is precisely what the American War Department handbook called it, the King Tiger performed its intended niche competently. The trouble with the niche argument lies in what it concedes. If the King Tiger's proper role was defensive gun platform work, then Germany spent roughly 321,500 Reichsmarks per unit, plus scarce alloy steel, plus enormous man-hours, plus the entire output of a bombed factory complex, on a mobile vehicle performing a role that cheaper, lighter, more numerous assault guns could largely have filled. A Stug 3 cost approximately 82,500 Reichsmarks, which means Germany could build roughly 4 Stug 3s for one King Tiger. One school of historians would argue that this documentary has been aiming at the wrong target for the last hour, and their argument is strong enough to address head-on. Robert Citino, Karl-Heinz Frieser in The Blitzkrieg Legend, and Richard Overy in Why the Allies Won All frame German defeat in terms with very little to do with tank quality. Logistics. Fuel starvation. Loss of air superiority. Allied material mass. Nicholas Moran, the analyst known as the Chieftain, returns repeatedly to the same theme and calls it the L word, meaning logistics. Under that framework, arguing about whether the King Tiger was a good tank comes close to irrelevant, because Germany's defeat was never determined in tank versus tank engagements. Here is why that framework does not exonerate the Tiger Rossby. It convicts it. Every one of the King Tiger's defining failures is a logistics failure wearing engineering clothes. Fuel thirst is a logistics failure, and Kampfgruppe abandoned Tiger IIs at Luglis because no fuel existed, then walked out on foot. Immobility is a logistics failure, and Schwerpanzerabteilung 501 lost 37 of 45 tanks to drivetrain failure across a 45-kilometer road march to Obeldau. Recovery burden is a logistics failure, and Schwerpanzerabteilung 509 lost 30 recoverable tanks in Hungary because nothing existed to retrieve them. Bridge weight limits are a logistics failure, since entire formations required surveyed Tiger routes and reinforced crossings, and an engineer bridge over the Sarvais Canal collapsed anyway. Track changes for rail movement are a logistics failure, at 2 complete track changes per battalion per deployment. Crew training is a logistics failure, because Germany rushed the Tiger Rossby to the front and put under-trained crews into a vehicle with a fragile drivetrain demanding gentle handling it was rarely going to receive. Historians who say the German failure was logistical are correct. The Tiger Rossby is not the exception to their argument. The Tiger Rossby is the clearest single illustration of it in the entire German inventory, a vehicle whose engineering excellence was purchased by writing checks against a logistical account already overdrawn. An honest counterpoint belongs here as well. Some analysts, including Nicholas Drummond citing the Tank Museum's position, argue that no user complaints about reliability can be found in the surviving German archive, pointing to high engineering standards, a well-ventilated engine bay, and quality components, and a related argument holds that the Tiger Rossby became reasonably reliable once the final drive teething problems were partially resolved. That position has to be weighed against the documented unit records, and the unit records are not ambiguous. 12 final drive failures in Schwerpanzerabteilung 506 after 50 to 100 kilometers. 37 of 45 broken down on a 45-kilometer march at Obeldau. 40 of 45 lost in Hungary with only 10 going to enemy action. Soviet testing at Kubinka recording breakdowns every 10 to 15 kilometers, engine overheating and gearbox failures. And the summary judgment that more Tiger IIs were destroyed by their own crews than by the Allies. When an archival absence of complaints collides with an archival presence of catastrophic failure returns, the failure returns win. Absence of evidence in one file is not evidence of absence when another file is full of wrecked gearboxes. Roughly 7 near-complete Tiger OSB tanks survive today, along with several wrecks. At the Musée des Blindes at Saumur, in France, stands the only running Tiger II in the world, carrying a production turret, and in 2025 it appeared at Tankfest at Bovington, driving alongside the Tank Museum's Tiger I. The Saumur vehicle is a post-war reconstruction assembled in 1949, with its turret and much of its mechanical content coming from Hauptmann Walter Schurf's command tank, number 300, of the 3rd Company of Schwerpanzerabteilung 503, which broke down and was abandoned near Fontenay-Saint-Père on 28 August, 1944. Its chassis came largely from Tank 123 of the 1st Company of Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 101. That vehicle was reported non-running in July 2007 with a broken transmission, before later restoration. Notice what the world's only running King Tiger actually is. 2 broken-down tanks, welded into one, 77 years later. At the Tank Museum at Bovington, in the United Kingdom, sits the pre-production example, most likely prototype V2, carrying the early curved Krupp turret, and the museum also holds hull number 280093, missing its engine, on loan from Shrivenham. At La Gleize in Belgium, at the December 44 Museum, stands Tiger 213, the Cognac tank. At Kubinka, now Patriot Park, in Russia, stands the command version with turret number 002, the tank marked 502, captured at Obeldau on 13 August, 1944. That is the vehicle the Soviet trials were conducted on, which means the tank Oskin's crew stopped as the tank that produced the test data. The Deutsches Panzermuseum at Munster, in Germany, holds a Tiger II with the production turret. An example sits in Switzerland, at Thun and Full, on loan, with restoration efforts noted. And the National Armour and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, in the United States, holds one more. Wrecks survive too. A largely complete but wrecked example lies buried under the regional road D913 near Fontenay-Saint-Père in Mantes-la-Jolie, and the Wheatcroft collection in the United Kingdom holds material with a rebuild planned. One persistent belief holds that the King Tiger-shaped post-war tank design, and the evidence for that belief runs thinner than the belief itself. One school argues that the Tiger OSB influenced heavy tank thinking generally, through heavy sloped armor combined with a long high-velocity gun, an approach echoed in the Soviet IS series and the T-10, and in Western heavies like the Conqueror and the M103. The contrarian reading, better supported by what actually happened, holds that the King Tiger influenced almost nothing directly. No nation copied it. No army adopted captured examples operationally. And the design philosophy that won the post-war argument was never the 70-ton breakthrough tank at all. It was the universal tank, later called the main battle tank, medium weight, good gun, good mobility, which is the Panther's conceptual lineage rather than the Tiger's. The heavy breakthrough tank turned out to be a technological dead end, and every major army worked that out within about 15 years of the war ending. Which leaves the strangest part of the King Tiger's legacy, and that is its cultural footprint. The Tiger OSB holds an enormous presence in video games, in scale modeling and in film, a presence completely disproportionate to a production run of fewer than 500 vehicles and a strategic impact that Anthony Tucker-Jones describes as local. More people have driven a King Tiger inside a simulation than ever laid eyes on one in the field. The mystique has expanded continuously while the historical record has been contracting under scholarly scrutiny. That scrutiny continues. Stephen Zaloga on kill claims. Roman Topol on unit histories. Jensen Doyle's archival rigor on production and ballistics. Wet and Harrisville on the clean Wehrmacht construction. Modern historiography is steadily deflating the romantic account and re-anchoring the Tiger OSB in economic and logistical reality. Return now to the 3 numbers from the opening. Between 487 and 492 Tiger OSB tanks. 49,234 Shermans, more than 57,000 T-34s. The Tiger OSB was not a bad tank, and concluding otherwise would be lazy as well as inaccurate. Its 8.8 cm KWK-43L71 stands among the finest tank guns ever fielded. Frontal armor proved immune at 300 meters to the standard Soviet medium tank gun. Wherever a Tiger battalion was committed, operational, supplied, and fighting defensively over ground it had chosen, the Tiger OSP was extremely difficult to deal with. The problem lies in how long that list of conditions runs. Committed, operational, supplied, defensive, on chosen ground. Strip away any single one of those conditions and the vehicle's record collapses. 37 of 45 broke down on a 45-kilometer road march to Obeldal. 12 final drives failed in one battalion around Arnhem inside 100 kilometers. 40 of 45 were lost in Hungary, only 10 of them to enemy action. Kampfgruppe papers suffered near total losses, most of them abandoned for want of fuel. 5 raids on Kassel cost more King Tigers in lost production than Germany ever completed. And more Tiger IIs were destroyed by their own crews than by the Allies. The title of this documentary calls the King Tiger too powerful to save Germany, and that phrasing was chosen deliberately, because power is never a single quantity. Power is denominated. The Tiger OSP held enormous power denominated in per-vehicle lethality. At 2,000 meters, against a single target, on a firing range, no tank in the world performed better. And the Second World War was not settled in that currency. The Second World War was settled in a currency Germany could never accumulate, made up of quantity, fuel, transport, recovery capacity, industrial redundancy, air superiority, and the plain ability to build 49,234 of something adequate rather than 489 of something exceptional. Germany chose to spend an economy atom 2s measured at roughly 13% of world manufacturing capacity on a machine that cost 3 times a Panzer IV, that was assembled by forced labor inside a factory Allied bombing erased, and that in the field was defeated by its own final drive more often than by anything the enemy managed to do to it. None of that is the story of a wonder weapon. What it describes is an industrial system that could still design brilliantly long after it had lost the ability to build, move, fuel and repair what it designed. The King Tiger was the most formidable tank on the battlefield, and it changed nothing. Those two facts sit together perfectly comfortably, and understanding why they do is the entire reason for studying it.